let's just dive right past the flashy headlines today. We're looking at the real story behind South Africa's latest economic numbers in this explainer. And look, it's a story about statistics, sure, but more importantly, it's about survival. It's about resilience, and frankly, a massive shift in how everyday people are actually making a living on the ground. We're kicking things off with this headline figure right here. According to the latest quarterly labor force survey, South Africa's official unemployment rate just dropped to 31.4% in the fourth quarter. That's the lowest it's been since late 2020. Now, at first glance, that sounds like absolutely fantastic news, right? You'd think, okay, the economy is creating jobs, people are getting hired. But as we know with economics, the headline literally never tells the whole story. Because when you pull back the curtain, the reality totally shatters that statistical illusion. Look at the expanded unemployment rate. It's sitting at over 42%. So why the massive gap? Well, the official rate only counts people who are actively hunting for a job. The expanded rate? That includes discouraged work seekers. Think about a highly skilled mechanic in a small town. He's dropped off a CV at literally every single garage for a year. Nothing. Eventually, he stops spending what little money he has on taxi fare just to hand out resumes because he knows the jobs simply aren't there. He desperately needs to work, but strictly speaking, he's no longer actively looking. That's the real-world heartbreak hidden inside that 42% figure. And this perfectly illustrates the long-term stagnation we're dealing with. If you trace the historical trend lines, you can see just how incredibly minimal actual employment growth has been when you stack it up against a rapidly expanding population. It's a severe structural mismatch. The economy is basically crawling, while hundreds of thousands of new people are entering the workforce every single year. Which brings us to Section 1, the unemployment illusion. Let's take a closer look at who is actually leaving the formal job market, and more importantly, why. Just look at this massive jump. 233,000 people. That's how many folks simply gave up looking for work in a single quarter. Literally, nearly 250,000 people threw in the towel in just 3 months. And that pushes the total number of discouraged work seekers in South Africa to a staggering 3.7 million. Now, remember, these aren't just invisible data points on a spreadsheet. We're talking about mothers, fathers, and young adults who've completely lost hope that the formal economy can provide for them. So, when you look at this, you can visually trace exactly what happened. That drop in the official unemployment rate, it wasn't because people suddenly landed amazing jobs. It happened because there was a massive surge of people exiting the job market entirely out of sheer frustration. When the labor force shrinks simply because people give up, the official percentage goes down. It's a total statistical illusion of progress. And when we zoom in on the youth, man, the picture is even more sobering. We're looking at a full-blown generational crisis. Nearly 2/3 of young people are totally locked out of the formal economy, around 62 to 64%. Imagine finally graduating, you're eager to start your life, and you find out that 6 out of 10 of your friends are just sitting at home with absolutely zero prospects. It's not just an economic issue, it's a massive social one that's going to dictate the entire future trajectory of the country. This leads us directly into Section 2, winners and losers. Because look, not all industries are suffering equally. To understand where the jobs are actually going, we need to unpack the massive sectoral shifts reshaping the economy right now. This sector shuffle perfectly captures what's going on. Construction actually had a decent run, adding 35,000 jobs, which is an encouraging sign that fixed investment is resuming. But unfortunately, that was completely overshadowed by huge losses elsewhere. The trade sector shed 98,000 jobs, and manufacturing lost over 60,000. To put that in perspective, think about local car manufacturing plants. They're facing intense competition from cheap Asian imports right now, which is forcing them to scale down their operations and let go of their staff. We're really seeing these intense global forces playing out locally. On one hand, we had some favorable weather that drove bumper agriculture harvests, adding a solid 30,000 jobs. But those tailwinds, they're getting completely battered by severe export headwinds. We're talking higher U.S. tariffs putting immense pressure on operating costs, plus massive logistics disruptions from the conflict in the Middle East. That's restricting maritime traffic and severely delaying shipments. Now, you might be wondering about the private sector. Strangely enough, private sector activity unexpectedly hit a 44-month high recently, according to the Purchasing Managers Index. But there is a massive catch. Businesses are getting squeezed incredibly hard on the cost side. Input costs just soared to a 30-month high. Companies are trying to navigate a weakened rand, surging global oil prices, and let's not forget that looming 8.7% electricity tariff hike. It's an incredibly restrictive environment just to maintain profit margins, let alone go out and hire new staff. All of this brings us to Section 3, the survival mindset. Because as households wake up to the fact that the formal economy can't fully support them, we're seeing a profound psychological and financial shift across the entire country. A financial advisor over at MoneyWeb summed up this shift absolutely perfectly. They said, for a long time, the plan was to accumulate wealth. In today's South Africa, the plan is to protect what you have. That really hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? We're witnessing a major pivot from a wealth-building mindset to a purely defensive survivalist one. It's no longer about climbing the corporate ladder and getting rich. It's literally just about making sure you don't lose the little bit you've managed to scrape together while the cost of everyday living absolutely skyrockets. Since the overall economy is only projected to grow at a stagnant 1.1% in 2025, and real wages are consistently failing to beat out inflation, traditional financial planning has basically been thrown out the window. A single salary? That's no longer considered safe. Every day, people are being forced to build their own safety nets by patching together multiple income streams. The whole concept of a side hustle has totally evolved. It's no longer some fun passion project. It is an absolute defensive necessity just to keep the lights on. So what do these modern side hustles actually look like? Well, citizens are adapting by launching these really cool hyper-local e-commerce businesses. Because they can't compete with giant international retailers flooding the market with cheap imports, they're pivoting to specialized niches. We're seeing a huge boom in stores selling eco-friendly goods or automotive parts because, hey, people are fixing up their old cars rather than buying brand new ones. They're also moving into digital services and educational resources. It's all about finding that hyper-local value that an algorithm simply can't replicate. And that perfectly tees up Section 4, the gig economy lifeline. This is where we transition from the theory of multiple income streams to the most visible, real-world execution of it. Get a load of this number. According to a recent Ipsos report, the gig economy now contributes a massive 2.8% to South Africa's national GDP. And honestly, that's just direct earnings. If you factor in the fuel gig workers buy, the taxes they pay, the real economic footprint is way larger. This sector is acting as a critical, vital economic frontier for a country that is absolutely starved of formal jobs. Digital platforms are literally absorbing the shock of the formal job market's failure. These apps are supporting up to 2 million South Africans right now. That makes up nearly 8% of the entire labor force. Remember those 3.7 million discouraged work seekers we talked about earlier? Well, for a lot of them, the gig economy is the only accessible way to start earning cash immediately. You don't need a fancy CV, you don't need to pass a rigid office interview, you just plug in and work. E-hailing in particular has become an absolute lifeline. Check out this breakdown. 30% of participants rely on driving for ride-hailing platforms as their primary source of income. It's literally how they put food on the table. The other 70%, they're using it as a secondary source, which goes right back to what we were just talking about, supplementing those stagnant office salaries that aren't keeping up with the rising costs of groceries and electricity. But here's a super fascinating local dynamic. When you compare South Africa to other African markets, it really stands out. In Kenya, mobile money like M-Pesa is deeply integrated. Seamless cashless rides are totally the norm there. But in South Africa, 80% of e-hailing transactions are still entirely cash-based. That really highlights the distinct operational realities on the ground. People need liquid cash in their hands immediately just to survive day to day. Okay, let's wrap this explainer up with a thought to chew on. As traditional formal jobs continue to vanish or stagnate, are these digital side hustles and e-commerce niches building a brand new, resilient economic foundation for South Africa? Or are they just a temporary survival strategy, keeping everyone's heads above water until real structural growth finally returns? It's a critical question to ask ourselves as we watch this market evolve. Keep questioning those headlines, keep diving into the data, and as always, stay curious.